Hey, this is Kyle, aka AlienTude. I've said before that I'm a big fantasy fan, and that it was one of the driving forces that got me into swords in the first place. I've been reading fantasy novels since I was in middle school, I'd guess, starting with The Hobbit and Narnia, moving on to Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms as a teenager, and so on. One of the absolute best epic fantasy series ever is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, and finished by my favorite author, Brandon Sanderson, after Jordan sadly passed away before completing the series. The Wheel of Time is known for incredibly rich lore and world building, epic scope, and nuanced characters. Everything I love in fantasy. One of the details that always captured my imagination was the concept of Heron Marked swords. Few swordsmen ever attain the distinction of being known as a blade master, and those that do are allowed to decorate their sword with a heron mark. Most of these heron-marked swords are different in design. Rather than the standard double-edged arming or longsword with crossguard that we're all familiar with, heron-marked swords typically were curved single-edged blades. Many people have interpreted this as katanas, and there's no doubt Japanese influence is felt in parts of Wheel of Time's world building, but I always felt that they were closer to a slender falchion as described. There's been a lot of heron-marked swords available. The Wheel of Time is a hugely popular and influential series, so it's no surprise that fans want to own a sword inspired by it. Most of the ones I've seen are either no longer available, not quite what I was looking for, or just way out of my price range. I put out some feelers looking for the unavailable ones that I liked, but never found one available, so I resigned myself to just waiting until the Amazon show released, which I hoped would inspire new models. However, it looks like they're leaning more into the katana inspiration for the featured Heron Mark sword, and while I like katanas, I just feel it's not quite what I want for this. Enter Purna Dahal. If you're not familiar with Purna, he's the Nepalese blacksmith behind Great Gurkha Kukri. He's an absolutely amazing blacksmith who has recently started taking commissions of swords and other blades that he's not familiar with. He knows kukris backwards, forwards, inside out, upside down. But European and fantasy-inspired swords are not his wheelhouse. However, over the past few months, I've been seeing people on the Sword Buyer's Guide forums posting their drawings of swords they were commissioning from him, and Purna's finished work looks amazing. I decided I wanted to try designing a custom Heron Mark sword for myself that Purna could hopefully bring to life. Now, I'm no artist. I can visualize things very well, but when it comes to translating that to paper, all subtlety and nuance flies out the window, and I'm left with what is essentially stick figures. So drawing the sword was just out. Instead, I downloaded LibreCAD for free, link in the description, and leaned on my 4 years of drafting and architecture classes in high school. So the big question was, what design did I actually want out of my Heron Mark sword? Now, I love ring guards, so I knew I wanted them on the blade. As far as I recall, they're never referenced in Wheel of Time, but I feel like they'd fit. I then looked through pretty much every single Heron Mark sword I could find, and took some heavy inspiration from probably the premier blacksmith of fantasy swords, Brendan of Fable Blades. This is the design I ended up with. Kind of a fantasy version of a two-handed Swiss saber, which makes sense because I've always liked the look of them. I borrowed the Heron Mark from the windlass design and some of the overall look from Fable Blades' multiple versions. I wasn't sure about some of the measurements the blade should have, especially in regards to the thickness of the spine as it distally tapers, so I reached out to brother Nathaniel from the SBG forums for assistance. He's commissioned a bunch of items from Purna and was extremely helpful in finalizing my design. By the way, he's recently started a YouTube channel, which I've linked in the description. Check it out. Design in hand, I contacted Purna via Facebook, sent him some images of the design, and we discussed some details. He was somewhat confused about the ring guards, which makes sense because there's nothing like them on the blades he's used to forging. I provided multiple example pictures, as well as a close-up of a scent stopper pommel. By the next day, he'd hand-drawn a full-size version of my design to use with his forging process. He quoted me $500 US for the sword and $200 US for shipping from Nepal to California, with an estimated completion in only 10 days. That's amazingly quick work for a commission, and cheap too. After payment, Purna started working the next day, and let me tell you, he works fast. He sent me pictures and a few videos of the work in progress, and my sword came together amazingly quickly. He was very open to small changes and refinements as we went, and in just over 2 weeks, my sword was completely finished and ready for shipping. Here's some images of what it looks like. I think it looks great. I can't wait to get it. When I receive this sword, I will do an unboxing video of it and eventually a review. If you're looking to get a commission made for a very reasonable price, I can definitely recommend Purna. Just be aware that because he's still inexperienced with swords, you want to go in with a good, well-documented design. Lots of measurements are going to be very helpful. Also, don't assume that something you take for granted on a sword, such as distal taper, will be worked in by default. Purna understands these concepts and can handle forging them with no problem, but he wouldn't immediately know to utilize them like an experienced swordsmith would. Okay, that about wraps up this video. Look for more about my Heron Mark Sword coming soon. Until next time, Alien Toot out.